People make bombs.
Yeah,
Right? That's a thing.
you're not wrong.
I
The
choose
nuclear
to not.
engineers in the
Yeah.
room just went, yeah.
I mean, I work here in Indianapolis. Raytheon's a company. I just
They
don't wanna
are
work
real.
there.
That is a real company.
Yeah, not my bag. Yeah, no.
Yeah. Okay. Okay, we're gonna have to talk about the Hogwarts that is engineering. That's
Okay,
how
yeah.
I am learning. The field of
Sure.
engineering is just Hogwarts.
Yeah, it's an art, right? I mean,
Yeah.
he talks about that, but I love his term for civils, and then I have my own kind of similar definition for the mechanical world, what design elegance looks like. Yeah.
Good. I'm gonna make you get into that. Well, hello everybody. Hello. Welcome to our October Books, Booze, and Brains. And I can't think of anything scarier than bridges collapsing. Is that the spooky tie-in?
It's pretty terrifying. Yeah.
Honestly, I think differently of
Yeah.
of everything around me. Every time I've been driving down the street, every building I look at, I'm like, is there something crumbling?
Civil and mechanicals do the most spectacular damage to
Yeah.
humanity all at once, right? Buildings collapsing, planes
Yeah.
crashing, those are all mechanical and civil engineering failures, every single one of them. At least that's the way the engineers look at
Can
it.
I tell you the one line of the book that it stopped me in my tracks when he says engineers can't bury their mistakes like doctors.
No.
Ooh.
It's in the news.
I had to,
yeah,
I had
it's
to
in the
pa-
news.
I was listening to the audiobook because it was free on Spotify. Had to hit pause, had to turn off the phone, had to go outside. I said, I need to go sit.
What if there's a Wikipedia article about every failure you've ever had?
I don't
Right.
think there's enough server space
That's a
on Wikipedia. And we're going to talk about failure. But so hello, everybody. Welcome to our October Books, Booze, and Brains, where we read or reading To Engineer is Human. And if you listen to it on the Spotify audiobook, Spotify should probably sponsor us because I'm plugging the hell out of your audiobook. Before we get started, before we get too deep into this, I do want to remind everybody, PSA, early voting is open. Make sure you go vote if you haven't already. Make a plan to vote and make sure that you, your friends, your family all have a plan to vote before next Tuesday. The election doesn't begin on Tuesday, it ends on Tuesday. So go ahead and get out early vote. I was going to make a registration reminder last month, but I totally forgot. So hopefully you're all registered to vote. So that is my civic PSA to get out and do your civic duty. Go vote. And before we get started, I just want to go ahead and thank Indiana Humanities, Indiana Sciences, our Indianapolis Public Libraries who help partner with us to make this happen and put this together. And then, of course, thank you to Ash and Elm for having great drinks and for getting ready for the Taylor Swift concert. They have some cute decor going on. Go Taylor. I don't listen to Taylor Swift. I was going to try to say something like catchy, and I was like, oh, I don't know anything.
Me neither. I'm an engineer. Sorry.
I feel like I'm the target Swiftie. I'm like a millennial young woman, and I know like maybe 4 of her songs. I'm sorry, millennial women. I'm sorry, Taylor. I failed you. But with that, I want to go ahead and get into our book. So our book, To Engineer is Human, talking about broadly engineering. I learned so much about bridges. I feel like you all probably learned a lot about bridges too, unless you are a structural engineer and you were like, I already learned all this. I learned so much. And here to talk about it is our wonderful guest. So go ahead and introduce yourself, Matt, and tell us a little bit about your background and kind of what type of engineering you do.
Sure. So my name is Matt Sowers. I'm a mechanical engineer by trade. I held a professional engineer's license in the state of Indiana from 2003 to 2013. I let it lapse because we don't really use it very much at work, not like civils do, so they use it a lot more. But I've been doing mechanical engineering for about 30 years now. I have about a score of patents to my name with 3 or 4 individual contributor
That's
patents.
so cool.
It's kind of nice to be able to, build a thing and then go to a store and see the thing you designed in a store. So it's pretty cool.
That's rad.
Yeah. So I spent probably the first, I want to say 10 years in the consumer electronics industry, and then like another 16 to 17 in the medical industry so far.
Okay.
And the remainder of time's been in other things like I worked for a while in windows and fenestrations, building, vinyl windows and doors or designing those. And I spent time working down here, downtown at Connor Richardson Battery. So working on automotive and marine battery designs for the polypropylene battery case that is the outside, the black part, the plastic part that you touch.
Yeah, the part I can touch.
Yeah.
The not spicy part of the battery.
Yeah. So it's a smattering of industries with a lot of design for manufacturing. So that's kind of what ends up designing the bar for one of the elements of design elegance that we go for, that he talks about in his book specifically. But, we have to have a paradigm. And one of those paradigms is somebody uses this thing. And it's got to be maybe a reasonable price.
Yeah.
It's got to be easy to figure out.
Yeah. So in your role as an engineer, I'm assuming you're not working alone on these projects. What is your role then in ensuring that something that you design is user-friendly and is adaptable?
Oh, that's a great question. So there's two, I guess you can divide the world into two buckets anyway, but you find a huge division in the world of engineering between the genesis of a thing and the analysis of a thing. So people are in engineering generally find themselves drawn to either analysis, like this guy is. He's an analysis guy. He loves analysis.
For sure.
You can tell by reading how he writes that he loves analysis.
Yeah.
So we love guys like him. I'm on the other side of the fence here. I'm in the design side. I start with a blank piece of paper and invent a thing that is something humans have never done before. And it's not that it's, this is, wild and crazy and out there. All it is a very simple evolution of a thing that we do today using tools that we use, but thinking of a new way to do it. So I'm using the same Legos that everybody else has. I just thought of a thing to build that they might not have otherwise done. And that's the creative process. That's the art inside engineering.
Yeah. Well, and so what do you think is, the author talks about with, the bridge examples, there are examples of successful bridges and successful structures.
Yeah.
But also he kind of hints that it's lazy and not, you don't want to just copy another bridge that already worked, but it worked. Isn't that kind of what you want to do if you're an engineer? So what does that balance look like? It being creative and innovative, but also if it ain't broke, don't fix it.
Oh, no, absolutely. So when you're doing design, there's always a design paradigm. And the design paradigm is some sort of optimization of, generally, as we say in the consumer world, you can choose among three things, you can pick two. You can have it good, you can have it fast, or you can have it cheap.
I have to pick one.
Yeah, you get pick two. So if you're building a bridge, it's got to be good.
Yeah, you pick two.
And it's generally got to be cheap because nobody wants to pay for a bridge. So then it's never going to be fast. So when you see these humans building bridges like the Brooklyn Bridge, this is a 12-year project, right?
Yeah.
And it took several years of planning before that. So this is the scale of human growth in this. Even the space program where we think of, wow, this is relatively new. There was a whole decade where they couldn't get a rocket off a launch pad, right? Think about how many of the Apollo rockets blew up. So these astronauts who are training to go to the moon are out there watching the launches going, oh, well, it went 500 feet before it exploded. I feel great about going to the moon on this guy.
And that was a win.
That was a decade of watching that happen because it blew up later. That's what progress looks like. Yeah. And it's very hard to see that in the world. And this is failure analysis with bridges is kind of hard to do. In the mechanical world, you can force failure and then ask, is it real? So if you build a bridge, you don't want to go out there and immediately stress it with lethal amounts of force because it will kill the bridge that you just spent all this money on building.
Yeah.
You actually don't want to test it that way. But since the things I build are not necessarily onesie twosies, like even if you're the government, they have more than one F-22 Raptor. Yeah. So you're right.
A handful.
So you build one and then you break it in very creative ways. And it's how you grade this failure. So with him in this book, he's got to wait for the failures to happen. And he has to wait for the conditions to be met that the failure happens in the way that he predicts. Yeah. And if it doesn't, he considers that a failed test. He talks about this.
Yeah.
So with the mechanical testing cycle, I intentionally break things because I can afford to make another one. So it's a difference in the scale. I'm not making a space station. Clearly, you can't do that with space stations. No. You can't do that with space shuttles.
There's an astronaut listening to this, like, please.
Right. So there's a limit. So the question you asked me is, where's the limit? It's how much money you got. So when
Yeah.
we went to the moon, the space program was like 2% of the American GDP. So
Oh,
if our
yeah.
space program had 2% of our current GDP, don't you think we'd be doing different stuff in space right now?
Yeah.
So it was just, taking the world by storm in
Yeah.
the sense of, hey, we're doing this stuff. So everybody was behind it. So that's funding, for example. So bridges, we need to get across there. And after a while, these companies are like, we lose so much money by shipping all of our stuff 60 miles that way to the nearest bridge
Yeah.
across and 60 miles back that we will pay for this bridge because us paying for this bridge is cheaper than
And
us
going around.
going around. Yeah. So
Yeah.
there's a number of cases in history where that was commissioned by different commissions that were funded by, the Brooklyn Bridge is a great example. That's why it's so many levels, as it served many people. They're like,
Yeah.
well, if you're going to put these big old hunks of stone out in the harbor, why don't we just, we'll put a people level, we'll put a car level, we'll put an animals level, we'll put
Yeah.
some trains on there, let's get some,
Throw a
let's get some
train.
utility out of there, right? So
I love that.
So that's ultimately that this paradigm then of cost has to enter into it, or you can't
Okay.
do the project. So that is scarcity of resources, and of course, you can get into the other side of that is, are these resources really scarce? But the fact of the matter is, a stone weighs a thing, and you have to get it from point A to point B, and that takes effort. So however much effort people want to put into it, that is a mathematical equation that I can take by multiplying the weight of the thing I need to move times the distance it needs to go.
Yeah.
And it doesn't matter how creative I get about moving it, I still need this kind of energy to make it go.
Mhm.
So you end up doing this energy computation of, can I move the thing to build the thing I want to build?
Yeah.
And this is how you solve it in civil engineering. You either have a pile of people who are relatively expendable, and there's a lot of that in history, or you figure out ways of doing it in a safe and effective manner, and you do it with OSHA and all this other stuff. And we have the bridges that we have built around here now with these modern materials, and we had to increase their quality. We had to increase the science behind them so that we use less materials and last longer. So if I pay twice as much for something that lasts 5 times as long, now it makes sense for us to build these highways as we did here, and why it took so long to get all this stuff in place.
Yeah.
They do not look like the bridges they replaced in any way. The technology leap is not just decades, but a full century of thinking about how we approach the design of these bridges. And you can see them go, that doesn't look like the previous thing. They're swoopy and curvy. And why they got to be swoopy and curvy?
Yeah.
And now we get to the other paradigm, the use paradigm. Does it do what I need it to do? Can I take this at 50 miles an hour?
Yeah.
That's a different requirement than the previous bridges that you could only take at 30, for example.
Oh, yeah. It made me, reading this and thinking about the role of not just engineering and technology and engineering, but just broadly how engineering and structural engineering has had to adapt to things like cars and trains and planes. And it almost like it co-evolves, and it's not.
Yes.
It's not just you coming up with the idea. It's you having to observe the world around you and say, this is the need of now, and this is the need of the technology of today. And I need to meet not only the project requirements, I need to meet, you almost, the author talks about this, you have to predict the future. And you have to go, okay, are, the car's going to get heavier? Are the trucks going to get heavier? Is the use going to get more? And where's your crystal ball?
So I want to show you. We're all going to play the crystal ball game right now. You
The
ready?
crystal ball game. Okay,
All right.
okay.
I have a book here in my hand.
Yes, you do.
What happens if I let go of this book?
It will probably fall unless you actually are a magician.
Let's pretend I'm just going to let it go. What do you think
Okay.
it's going to do?
It's probably going to fall
Okay, why do you say that?
because of past experience.
Correct. And your past experience has always shown this to be true.
Yeah.
So now you're not seeing the future. You're conjecturing a likely outcome. How
Okay.
accurate must your outcome be for this particular case? Is this a life or
Well-
death matter for you to predict?
There's probably a bacteria on that book for which it is.
But I'm quite sure
But
if I
for
let
me,
go
no.
of this, it's going to fall. Should we test it?
You know
All right.
what? Yeah.
All right, we're going to test it right here. Here's
The
a
one
live
engineer in
test.
the room went, yeah.
It fell.
It fell.
And that matches every experience you've always had in your
Yeah.
life. And because we are in the process, come on, thank you.
Unless acted upon by an outside
Right,
force.
yeah, sure. But from our experience, we learn this. So this is why play is critical to science. because I need you to know how a ball bounces for me to tell you what the coefficient of restitution is. So you're like, that sounds like a fancy word. Have you ever let go of a bouncy ball? Does it ever come back up to your hand if you just drop it?
No.
Never. It can't. So it has some rebound that we call this coefficient of restitution. How likely is it to bounce back? And with a rubber ball, that's going to depend on the temperature, the air pressure, all sorts of things. Now, in physics class, they're like, oh, yeah, here's a simple equation, and here you go.
Yeah.
But once you get to your first day, freshman year of engineering, they're like, okay, everything you learned in physics is wrong. And here's why. Because the world isn't an infinite frictionless plane. And ropes are not massless. And pulleys have friction. And air blows on things. So now how do you guess, right? So you have to do things like measure this. So now it becomes critical that I know how fast this book hits the ground. Well, now I need to drop this book a lot and take a lot of measurements to figure out, oh, I see this acceleration of gravity. Now I can figure out eventually over time, sometime between, the dawn of humanity and, Newton, you get to a guy where he's like, this is pretty consistent.
Yeah.
And there's a lot of people in history who also documented this acceleration of gravity and objects dropping very consistently. And this is well documented through every civilization. Everyone figures out that stuff falls, but the answer for why it falls is a much harder question that I don't have to deal with. I just need to know that it falls.
Yeah, great answer.
So coefficient of restitution, another one that people would use in sports, my favorite one, the center of percussion. What is the center of percussion?
Sounds like a great band name.
So
if you have a
people
garage
call it
band.
the sweet spot, whether it's baseball or tennis or any striking object sport where you're hitting the thing. There's a point where you hit the ball with the object that you're holding in your hand and it launches it with very little effort.
Yeah.
And we use this same thing for designing hammers, right? So if we're designing a hammer, we try to build in some features that let you know which end is the poundy end and which end is the holdy end. And then on the holdy end, we make it sculpted to fit your hand there.
Yeah.
Because if you hold it here, there's some math that says the amount of mass that is different from where its center of gravity is. So if I throw this or spin it, it's going to spin around this point here, right?
Yeah.
Most of the weight's up here.
Yeah.
So if I take this distance times where I'm holding it and this distance time where its center of mass is, and I balance those like it's a perfectly balanced seesaw, every swing delivers maximum hit to the nail, and it doesn't give you tennis elbow. It doesn't make your elbow hurt. It absorbs the shock correctly.
Yeah.
So I'm balancing this lever just so that at the instant that it strikes the nail, you feel nothing, and you drive the nail in good. And that's the difference between a $10 hammer and a $50 hammer. Go ask your friends who do framing for a living. They'll tell you.
Yeah. Ooh.
So this is an example of design elegance. I need to hit a cost target. So I have this little tiny half-pound hammer I'm living in a dorm room and I need to poke some nails into the wall to hang a picture up, right? So that's this hammer. But a 2-pound framing hammer, while it looks like this, is a serious instrument.
Yeah.
And that's the difference between, say, a regular car and a race car.
Yeah.
They have the same difference in paradigm, right?
Yeah. You mean I can't take my Prius to IMS and just absolutely rip rubber?
I mean, you can to a point.
That's true. That's true. And I think that takes us into my first turn and talk. And thank you for you mentioned I need you to play. Because earlier this season, if you were with us, we read Your Move, and it was a book about playing board games.
Yes.
And one of the, we're going to get into failure, because really the theme of that book was learning how to fail in a social, in a fun way. Yeah. This isn't failing in a fun way. Engineering isn't failing in a fun way.
It is absolutely failing in a social way. And I will tell you how. Yes.
Okay.
Every experiment that I do and every product I work on is an experiment in social failure. Because nobody who uses my devices, except for an incredibly small slice of the population, are the mechanical engineers as skilled and trained in the art that I do. Therefore, anybody who grabs my thing has to figure out, how do I use this tape player? How do I use this answering machine? For those of you in the room old enough to know what an answering machine is.
Oh, no.
Right. So how do I put in a new CD? How do I get it to move in its carousel? So this is in this world. Now I go to the medical world. I need a diabetic to take a test. And when you watch The Life Diabetic, and I don't have a concept of absolute good and evil, but I can tell you that diabetes is on the evil end of the spectrum. And when you watch a diabetic go through the ritual of trying to extract a strip from his vial and plug it into a meter, prick his finger, bleed on the strip, get his number to figure out the computation that he now must do to figure out how much insulin he gets, while remembering that he can't feel any of this with his fingers. He's doing it by sight, and now he's going to play 37 pickup when he's done with $37 worth of strips.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
So this is a ritual that a human should not have to do.
Yeah.
So I think it takes a certain type of empathy that other people in other professions don't have, because they're not thinking about how much it sucks to live with what this person is doing.
Yeah.
So then you might consider it a crime to not step in and try to make their life suck less.
Yeah.
And that's my basis for doing my mechanical design in the medical field.
Yeah. Well, and you describe it as an art, and I think reading through this book, really all of the engineering examples he walks through, and he talks about how important the artistic and the creative aspect of it is. But I don't think we necessarily see engineering as, like, I wouldn't associate those two words together.
Yeah, yeah.
And so my first turn and talk.
Neither does my wife's aunt.
Yeah.
She's like, I didn't know you guys were creative at all. I didn't know you could do art. I'm like, everything I do is art, bro.
But in this book, it seems so critically important. If you want to be a good engineer, you are educated in history, you're educated in art, you're educated in the humanities. And so my turn and talk is, what do you think the role is or should be for an engineer to participate in the arts and the humanities? Like, should it be required coursework? So, we talk about
Yes.
engineering students.
Yes.
We think it's like, it's math. It's a lot of math. It sucks.
Yeah, but it's not.
Math doesn't suck.
That's the thing. No, but it's
Okay.
not, right? It's 60% of my coursework at Purdue, and this is Purdue. This is state school, right? I'm a state school kid. I can't afford to go out of state. So there, I got probably one of the best engineering educations that you can get, which is awesome.
Yeah.
And it was done in this context of, you don't matter, or you're just a number or whatever. And you start to learn what they're teaching you, which is to set your pride aside.
Yeah.
So you have to be the one to slap your own baby in public, because otherwise your designs aren't safe.
Slap your own baby in public. Okay.
So
That's a new one.
sorry for the visual, but it's
no, I've just never heard that before.
I think there's a lot of people who let their pride get into it. And when you study humanities, you learn the rest of it. So the 40% of my degree was I took linguistics. I was in band. I took jazz for all 4 years that I was there.
Band kids.
Right,
All the
absolutely.
STEM kids are band kids. That's real.
Sure.
That's real.
Yeah. And so, and I had to take communications classes. I took, years of Spanish. I mean, just things like this. So this is stuff that is outside my core curriculum. Oh, my favorite one, history of science and technology in Western civilization. It's how you learn how the internal combustion engine came from a sail. And when you can concept that in the mechanical engineering world, when you look at a sail on a boat and you see the same thing as the internal combustion engine in a car, I learned that in a history class, not a systems engineering class. And then I applied that from a history class in a systems engineering class. And my professor was like, what are you doing?
Yeah.
It's like, this is how this works. And he's like, this is never going to work. So we built it and it worked the first time. That's what at least in the mechanical world, your justification is it works the first time, right? Now with the civil guys, they have to get it right the first time, but their approach is many passes, and it's very challenging, right? Because they have a literally shifting environment. So
yeah, so I'd love to give just a few minutes, and I really want this to be like a group discussion with you, because you do have that experience, and we know how our guest feels. So be careful with what you report back on how important you think humanities education is in the field of engineering. So I'll give a couple minutes, and then for our live listeners, we're going to keep talking, and then we'll come right back. Yeah, so we won't we'll still be going for the live stream on Facebook and Twitch.
Okay.
And then we'll report back, from what other people, just to hear what other people have to say about this, because I almost want to play devil's advocate a little bit to the student who's paying for those classes, and they're saying, I just want to be an engineer. I have to take a history class to be an engineer, and it's not related.
I fully admit I said exactly those words at the time. I can tell you now, 30 years later, I have a very different opinion on it. And I'd like to
Interesting.
think that that's what wisdom does to you.
Ooh, yeah.
Wisdom is the thing that you get just after you needed it. Right?
That's too true.
Yeah.
Too true.
So that's the whole point of engineering is how do you
Yeah.
put points in wisdom as fast as possible, right?
Mhm.
Because if you don't, you learn nothing, and then you repeat the sins of the past. It's
Yeah.
not intelligence that teaches you how to do good design. It is wisdom that
Mm.
teaches you how to do good design. And there is no way to gain wisdom in engineering without humanity.
Oof. Yeah.
So the thing that catches my eye in here is I love this because this is a great thing that's in the book here. So they talk about structural engineering as the science and art of designing and making with economy and elegance buildings, bridges, frameworks, other similar structures so they can safely resist forces to which they may be subjected. So then the mechanical engineering is, instead of this, it's not the forces that which they're subjected. Those forces include market forces. They include the ability of a user to learn the use of my object. You don't
Yeah.
walk up to a bridge and you're confused about how to use it.
You're right.
And I can bet that there are humans in the room who don't know what these objects are and what they do. And it is not mechanical. Right. So what do you think these are? Let's play the game. If we have time right now. Let's play the
Yeah.
game. What do you think these are?
I-
Play with them. Tell me what you think they are.
I have no idea
These
what
are
this.
mechanical engineering design fails. So this is why
Okay.
I'm showing you these.
Yeah.
This is what failure looks like in the
then
mechanical
what-
design world. This is very human. Tell me this isn't a human failure because you can't even figure out what this thing is.
I feel like I got to put something in there, but I don't
Are
know
you ready
what.
for a hint? So the first
Okay.
hint is they are the same object.
No.
They do the same task.
No, they don't.
They absolutely
No.
do. You want me to spill the beans or do you want to leave the suspense?
What do you mean this does the same thing? That what is?
Do you
Lemons
yield?
aren't this. Yeah.
Okay.
Could you put a
So,
lemon in that? I don't.
They're garlic presses. So you put
No
the garlic on the
shot.
counter and you rock this through. Or for that
No
one,
shot.
you peel your garlic.
Okay,
you
that's
drop it in
garlic
here,
size.
And you just squeeze real
Okay.
hard. So this gives you good mechanical advantage.
Hey.
I had to explain to you what these are.
That threw me for a loop. Oh my god! Yeah. It's called To Engineer is Human. And it is, if you have Spotify Premium, the audiobook is free. Yeah, it is a really good book. Even if you're not, oh my God, no.
Thanks. I would love to do that if you could hook me up. The problem is I'm an engineer and I don't know those people. Yeah. I have a face for-
WYFI?
Yeah,
Are you
Well, I have
listening?
a face for radio too, so it's perfect.
Stop. Oh my God, no, thank you. Yeah,
So that's why I brought these.
that's wild. That's for garlic.
Yeah, these are both garlic presses.
You're going to look me
So
in my,
this is bad mechanical engineering.
that's crazy.
So I had to bring
That's crazy.
examples. All right, so that's my bad example. I already showed you one
That-
good example.
That's wild.
Here's another great example. This is good mechanical engineering.
Yes.
Are you confused about what this is? Do you know
No.
what it's for?
I have like 3 at home.
And then you can think of 15 other uses for this that have nothing to do with the fact that it's a stick with a handle.
Yeah.
The most
Yeah.
design elegant tool that humans have is a stick with a pounder or just the stick itself.
The stick.
Stick. We have no other
Undefeated.
Tools. All our tools are sticks. The
Yeah.
linkages in an engine, sticks. All of them sticks. I build the thing out of Legos. When I tell you I get to invent the Legos, they're still Legos. They're still planar objects or
Yeah.
injection molded things or cast parts or whatever.
Yeah.
They're sticks. So that's the creative process.
I
so
love this.
now I have to figure out what makes it the right size handle. How
Yeah.
should the handle feel? How long should it be? What should
Ooh.
it smell like?
Yeah.
What do people like the colors? What if you're colorblind and you can't tell them apart because you're a male electrician?
Yeah,
And
yeah.
you're down in the dark basement.
Yeah.
What do I do? So, right.
Yeah.
So there's tons of considerations that go into this that have nothing to do with the bridge. And that's the difference between what I do and what that guy does. He's trying to keep people alive. I'm trying to connect with humanity so that they
Yeah.
can. So bad design is just like a bad joke. If I have to explain it to you, it's no good.
God, you're so right. You're so right. That's crazy. That's actually crazy. You just blew my mind. This is the part I hate about these book talks when I talk to experts and I go, great, my worldview is just,
If I'm doing my job right as a science educator, I wish to educate people that they already know all the science they need to do literally everything I do. So the
Okay.
creative process of what I do has nothing to do with math. The math guided me. That is a tool that gets me to an answer. But I promise you, I haven't written out an equation in 30 years. I haven't written a computer program in 30 years.
Yeah.
I haven't done CAD in 20 years. I tell people words and write sketches on Post-its and hand it to a person that like, oh my God, how did I not think of this? And I'm like, because you didn't see me do this wrong for 30 years.
Yeah.
So you don't know that I failed for 30 years. So I have 30 years of failure.
Yeah.
And when you have 30 years of failure from words of people like, man, I don't like the smell of this, or wow, this is pokey, or this doesn't feel right in my hand. And I get to sit and watch these people on the other side of a glass mirror use our products. And the sales and marketing people are having finger sandwiches and drinking coffee. And me and the other engineers are glued to this glass, watching these people fumble with our stuff.
Yeah.
And they're like, what are you looking for? I'm like, this person is having a shitty time. And you suck at telling me because you're a dude bro and you lack empathy about what this person is actually suffering through.
Tell me.
So me, the nerd, the spectrum kid, has to somehow analyze humanity and get the empathy necessary to figure out what they're struggling with to give them the design. Tell me another art that empathizes with a human without ever having met them to create a device that you will instantly be able to use. Tell me that's not art.
Damn.
Yeah? Board game design. That's right. But you're
design,
intentionally making a complicated thing. That's the point. The more complicated it is, the more fun. But that's a spectrum. So on the one end, we have us ADHD kids with, Magic the Gathering because we need a 285-page rule book. I mean, anything less would be a weak-ass game. Yeah. And then you've got purists like Rufus that play chess. And his chess is, it's a Zen, right? Yeah. But it's the same sort of problem solving that goes on. Yeah. So it's the exercise of problem solving. That's the play. So the play that we do and the reason that we play tactical games is because we can try to do things in a non-threatening environment among friends. And that includes role-playing like Dungeons & Dragons. Yeah. I can pretend to be a real human with other nerds who won't judge me for doing it wrong. And then I can come out in public and talk to people like you and sound like I'm a decent guy. It's very well practiced, but it's a thing.
Absolutely. Yeah. Huge plug for Your Move, by the way. If you have not read the board game design book, Your Move, really great, really fun. And that's actually kind of crazy how heavily that book and the themes of that book about like failure and how important failure and play is as an adult really feeds into how important failure and play is for an engineer, which I don't think that's wild that we're reading both of these books.
You don't learn how a bicycle works until you wreck one.
Yeah.
Right? And then you got to go home and not get your ass beat from your parents because you wrecked your bike. So you got to figure out how to fix it before you get home without tools. So there's a lot of physics lessons just in life laying around out there if you pay attention to them.
Yeah. And building catapults to hit siblings with things. I mean,
Absolutely.
You're right. There's so much engineering. If you have a sibling, if you
have a sibling, you know what to do with a rubber band. Yeah. That's right. True. 100%.
True. 100%. So I'd love to hear if anybody, we heard your thoughts on how important the humanities and arts training is for engineers, but I'm playing devil's advocate a little bit here. If I'm a student at Purdue and I'm paying all this money to get an engineering degree, why do I have to take a history class? Yeah. Is that, well, and if I'm driving across a bridge, do I care that why should I care that the person who built that bridge or built this building or who designed this pipe, why should I care that they took an arts class? Yeah. In reality, if my toilet flushes, if I can get across a bridge, I can take a hot shower. Right. Why do I care that the people that design those things, why should I care? Why should I care that they, I don't know, took mythology?
Sure.
I don't know. I don't know if I do. I don't know if I do care. Maybe I should. Maybe I should care more. But no, really, if they can design a badass hot water heater, brother, I don't care if you ever heard of Monet.
What's a good screwdriver, right?
Yeah. Honestly, yeah.
Yeah.
In the middle of home reno right now? Yeah.
It's like, why is this one worth this,
God, right? I have one at home. And it's my favorite.
Everybody does.
It's my favorite.
Everybody does. Yeah. So I think that studying humanity is the way that these people can recognize that they need to break away from the paradigm of solving the problem and see the forest from the trees, which is, who are you solving the problem for? So when you build a bridge, you're not building a bridge because a bridge needs to be built there. You're building a bridge to solve a problem. So engineers fundamentally are problem solvers. We try to solve problems. And the problems that we are presented with are generally human problems. Things like, I need to go from here to there without going 60 odd miles out of my way. So that's a real human problem. Other real human problems are, I need to control my disease of diabetes. Another real human problem is I need personal transportation that gets me inexpensively from one location to another. I need to brush my teeth. I need to open a door, right? I need to wedge the door open with something. These are all mechanical design problems, and they're all very human problems to solve. So if we don't spend time learning about engaging with the things that make us most human, namely these humanities, then I think you really kind of miss the boat. And the reason it needs to be there is going to hit everybody differently. So for me, it was history of science and technology and Western civilization, hitting the point of making me realize that a very complex system and a very simple system have the same equation. And when you look at that, you begin to see how powerful the concepts are in engineering system design. And that's a thing I teach to inspire other engineers, because only other engineers would care. The output of that is that I can teach what is an effective paradigm for a human, what sucks. So I can go to a person and say, how many newtons should the force be on your power button on your phone to depress? What's the right number? Well, because I'm about to make 10 billion of those phones over the next 2 years, so we better get it right. And if you get it wrong, nobody likes our phone, our whole company tanks, and we can't fix the stuff that's already launched out in the field. So thanks, your ability to make a crappy phone button is bad. So what can go wrong with a phone button? It can be too easy to press. So you're just turning it on and off all the time. You're just toggling it accidentally. So that's super bad. You don't want that kind of functionality. Nobody expects that functionality. Same with then, it can't be too hard to press. Because if it never gets pressed in your pocket, you might not have the thumb strength to press it, especially if you have some kind of hand strength issue. So now we ask the same question about what makes these other things good or bad. How fast does a car need to go? How fast should, how should the screwdriver work? How big, how much should the handle be? So with these humanity discussions, then it allows the engineer to internalize their human experience, externalize that experience with others, ask them questions like, why does my design suck? Right? Why do you hate this? I'm going to hand you a thing and you're going to tell me why you hate this. Right? And they're like, why would you ever say such a thing? It's like, this is how engineers show each other love, because I trust you enough to get an honest opinion that is about the thing and not about me. Okay. And that takes a certain kind of trust that I don't think you get other than in foxholes and things like that. Right? So you understand that the price of failure could be death, depending on your industry. So it's nice to work on toys, but sometimes you got to make real stuff, right?
Well, and it seems like the conclusion, it seems like the conclusion that the author comes to is very similar here, which is that maybe I can build a bridge and a pipe and a building without any of that experience, but by having those experiences and by having that education, it just makes you better. And it makes your designs better. And so maybe you don't necessarily, maybe you can practice engineering, but it won't be the best version
His
of that
example is, he thinks of how much ice and snow is going to accumulate on this roof to weigh the building down so the building doesn't collapse on all the people in it.
Has anyone been to IU, the IU
That's a
People
mess.
Mover?
Sure,
That they did not anticipate snow and ice ever getting on the rails, and that is why it shut down. That is the rumor I heard while I was at IU. I don't know if that's real, though. I want to believe it. This is my conspiracy theory, IUL.
It's a pretty classic design mistake, and it's one of the classes. So I mentioned I had to take a civil engineering class. That's on one of the finals. So when you do a computation, you describe in your very first civil engineering class, structures is what it's called, is the concept of what these structures fundamentally do. It doesn't matter if I'm working on a hammer or a building, there's still a load that it takes.
Yeah.
There's a force that you put on it, and
Yeah.
it has to hold it. So what you learn in structures is that you can stack things
Yeah.
and squeeze them really good, but only a certain number of materials can you pull on. So if you grab a brick, you can't pull on a brick. It will fall apart. But you can squeeze a brick, and you can stack piles and piles of other bricks on top of them.
Yeah.
As long as you're squeezing it, then it won't fail.
Yeah. Y'all, the show and tell today is so real.
So the last example I had was this.
Okay. A
So
ruler.
This is a beam,
A beam. A
a
beam.
structural beam.
Okay.
So if I grab this, and got my hanger here. So I have a
Okay.
hanger
Oh,
here.
Okay.
So if I were to take this hanger and put it through this hook, you see how far this beam hangs down.
Yeah.
Is this a stable design? Would
It's
you want to hang your coat on this?
No.
No, and why not?
It's gonna fall. I
It's
think.
pretty obvious.
Probably.
How did you know? Did you take all the structural engineering classes I did?
I surely did not.
Okay, well then how did you figure it out?
I don't trust it.
Because you played. You see
Yeah.
thin, flimsy things are thin and flimsy.
Yeah.
We have words that describe thin and flimsy things by saying thin and flimsy.
Yeah, the technical
Engineers
term.
did not invent those terms.
Yeah.
Writers did.
And you just use them.
If I can tell you the difference then between strength and
Yeah.
durability, that those mean different things in English just like they do in engineering, then that's
Yeah.
important. So
Yeah.
this is not a good a good stable design. Now watch what
Yeah.
I'm going to do. I'm turning this 90 degrees.
Yeah.
Now look at how stiff this beam is. All I did was just turn this 90 degrees. You could easily hang your coat on.
Yeah.
Go ahead and grab it.
Oh no.
Try pulling
That's-
down.
Oh God. Yeah, that's wow. That's a lot more solid than I thought it was gonna be.
So what did we learn? We learned that the engineering is thinking outside the box to turn the beam sideways and get a different loading condition
Yeah.
out of it. We learned that by play.
Yeah.
We did not invent an equation for this. I promise you, the explanation for this, which is for the mathematicians in the room, it's the second moment of inertia. We just turned its axis and now it resists that because it has a higher second moment of inertia. That is the technical explanation of what we did.
God.
However, what we figured out a long time ago when we were building things out of wood is it took a lot less wood if you just had long, slender beams and set them on their edge and then covered the tops of them and made boxes.
Okay.
And they still do that for every kind of floor in every building in the world.
Yeah.
It's that good of an idea that
Oh,
we
wow.
really can't beat it. And all we had to do was take this thing and do this.
Yeah.
So this is what invention looks like. This is art. This is the creative portion.
Okay.
And none of that was applied originally by principle, but by people goofing around with the
Yeah.
stuff laying around them. And that's why the play becomes critical.
Yeah. Well, and I'm so glad you bring it back to the human element because I want to take us in. I want to take us into our another turn and talk, and that is the role of technology. And this book was written not in 2024.
No, it's
But-
been a minute.
But I do think it's really interesting, and I'm curious if other people feel similarly. The author pushes back on the use of like computers and technology, and you know,
Because he's old.
he says it's,
I'm old too.
he says, you know, to the engineers coming up and learning that he sees they're using the technology, they're using the computers, and he feels like it makes them lazy. And he says that and this is the quote. He thinks that they need to learn how to do it the old-fashioned way. My turn and talk to you is: do you think that you should always, like specifically in engineering, do you think, or really in any other? I mean, there's so many different applications and areas where we have computers to help us, but there's always the old-fashioned way. If you're learning something, especially something as important as, you know, structural engineering, do you think you should have to learn it the old-fashioned way? Is there a benefit to learning it the old-fashioned way, or by using the computer as a tool, are we better off just not even, I don't want to call it wasting the time, but I think this is potential to be hot take area, because I think there are people who are diehard, you have to learn something the old-fashioned way. And I think there are a lot of people, especially younger people, who probably don't think it's worth the time. I would love to hear your thoughts in this turn and talk on learning something, if you should have to learn something the old-fashioned way, especially for an engineer and in this context. So I want to come back in a few minutes and talk about that. I think it's going to be a hot take. Because this author really was, calculators,
But
they're lazy.
That's because he's an analysis guy. So he wants you to understand the fundamentals of the analysis and
Yeah.
why you're doing the analysis. Okay, so the general rule for engineering is I can give you a 70% correct answer on the back of a napkin in 5 minutes.
Okay.
I can give you an 80% correct answer in a day on some paper with pencil.
Okay, like
I
that.
can give you a 90% correct answer in a month with a computer set of tools.
90%, yeah.
And I can give you the 95% answer in a year with a team of individuals. I can give you the 99% answer in a decade with a team of hundreds of engineers and all the modern tools and a portion of our GDP. So it is an exponential amount of effort to get the higher quality of prediction. So there's a point where it's like, why don't we just fucking build it and try it, bro? And I work in a discipline where I get to do that. My microelectronics never cost more than hundreds, possibly thousands of dollars to build 10 of.
Okay.
So I can build a cell phone for about 10,000, or I can build 100 of them for like 10,000 to $50,000 or something like that to prototype them, and then I can throw some of them on the ground, which will piss off the electrical engineers. I'll let them do all their testing first, and then when they're done with all their testing, then I take all the finished doubly and the software things. I'm like, I'm going to now throw these on the ground until all of them break, and we're going to do it in a very controlled fashion. I'm going to measure exactly the amount of energy it takes for them to break, and that kind of stuff. Oh yeah, there's a real process to it.
Oh my god,
because it's a statistical game now.
Yeah, well,
so this is why the new phone costs 30% more than the old phone, because they're gambling that they're 30% wrong. So the factor of safety now, they're making it to a factor of safety of 1.2, and they're selling the other 0.3 to you for a 30% increase in price. So you are paying for that factor of safety because they don't know. So they just charge them more for the phone so they don't lose a whole bunch of money. So, and then they cover their losses. They quietly pocket that if they don't get a whole bunch of returns. But if they get a bunch of returns, now they have cash in the kitty to pay off those returns and give them new phones that will fix it in the B-Ray. That's how consumer electronics works. Yeah. Right. So engineers learn finance, we learn business, we learn computer science, we learn material science, we learn, all the business stuff that everybody else learns to do. Then we have to do all the communications things that communications people do, because I have to teach people who don't know anything about my art how to spend $100 million on the thing that I'm trying to build that's going to make them billions of dollars. But how do they make that gamble? How do they know? So they have to take it on faith from me. How do I demonstrate that faith? I'm like, well, I'm just the nerd you've got whose paper you can copy off of. If you want to find a better paper to copy off of. I mean, the arrangement hasn't changed, right? I've been letting kids copy off my paper for lunch money since I was in school. So the equation is still the same. I'm just dealing with different people who have more money. But in the process, I'm the one that's injecting the humanity into that, not the dude bros with the cash.
No, jeez. But so do you, but you're right though. It's crossing so many different intersections. It would be
I spend valuing less than 20% of my time doing engineering, right? At work. 80% of my time is sitting in meetings and teaching other people what the other engineers are doing.
But when you're thinking of like a student or somebody coming into the field of engineering, how important do you think it is that they can do something without a computer? You can That's
a great question.
Even getting to that 70% point.
I am modern enough to know that any teaching tool is a valid teaching tool.
Okay.
He's still inculcated by an education system that had run for 400 years.
Yeah.
And it still runs here today. The idea that this serves corporations.
Yeah.
It should not be. Education serves humanity. So that's wrong.
Yeah.
So we're slowly breaking out of that. The Montessori method is becoming more popular. These are all examples of stuff that's, us finally breaking through this. Hey, everyone can. So I don't really care if people use shortcuts as long as you understand the principle behind it and what the shortcut means.
Okay.
So I use a calculator all the time, not because I can't or shouldn't or should. It's just, so the one I hear from engineers his age was using a slide rule instead of hitting the log button on your calculator. They're like, well, you should see the change in rates. And I'm like, I can read a psychrometric graph for, steam quality tables. That is a 4-axis graph represented on 2-dimensional paper. If you can decode what that thing looks like in your head, the slide rule is a joke. So this isn't hard, buddy. Figuring out what a steam table is telling you, that's hard. So it requires, for my particular art then, within the world of mechanical engineering, we're the ones that focus the most on a principle called spatial acuity. So the idea that I can focus on everything in this room and I can tell you the dimensions of the room. I can tell you, a lot of features about this room or whatever. But it's just because I notice it. And when I think of where my keys are, say at home, I don't think of, oh, it's upstairs in my bedroom on the table. I think of an XYZ coordinate in the house that is floating in space, and that's where my keys are. So it's visualizing the world in a different place where everything is vectors and points and stuff like that.
Yeah.
Because now I can see what's actually driving this. So when I look at this hammer, I see these two masses and their two separate centers of gravity. I can mentally see the lever. And so now I can see the effect of, oh, that guy's choked up on the hammer. He's going to hurt himself. Or he's choked down too far on the hammer. He's going to hurt himself.
Yeah.
So you watch people using a sledgehammer. Most people don't know how to use a sledgehammer.
No. Yeah.
It takes practice, but for exactly that reason, you have to figure it out. So some tools take training, like a car. But to you, those 1,700 parts that drive you around is what? A gas pedal, a brake pedal, and a wheel.
Yeah.
That's your interface.
Oh, yeah.
So engineers
that's all I got
jump
in
through
me.
hoops to turn this 1,700 component behemoth that weighs 4,000 pounds into a steering wheel and two pedals for you.
Yeah.
You can't tell me that isn't humanity.
Yeah.
You can't tell me that is the expression of what these engineers see. Yes, of course, we have artists helping us. That's who sculpts the seats and picks the colors and the feel of the fabric. And they're like, no, engineer, you have to use this fabric, and it's got to be this color, and it's got to feel like this. And like, man, that super sucks, and it's expensive. And they're like, make it work, or else this is bad. And what you find is people who sit down in cars, they're like, I don't like the feel of the steering wheel, and they get out of the car. So they're not wrong, right? Or I don't like the layout of the buttons on the dash panel. I'm not buying this car. You know, so little things like that that are real artists, I have to use those people called industrial designers. So they're my helpers. They're the people who have one foot in the technical realm and one foot in the artistic realm.
Yeah.
And those are the people. So I loved working with those guys at RCA. I would show them my pottery, one guy. And he's like, wow, I'm looking at it. So I used to teach pottery for 17 years at the Indianapolis Art Center.
Oh my
right?
God.
Yeah. So again, I do some art. So I was teaching wheel thrown ceramics, and he was like, let me see your portfolio. So he looks at my portfolio. He's like, this is brilliant. Do you have any pieces that aren't functional wear? And I was like, well, no. And this harkened back to a previous conversation where I asked him, why does this cable modem have to be shaped like this? He's like, if you're going to take time to make something, make it beautiful. So I turned to him and I was like, well, the reason all my stuff is all functional wear is because if you take time to make something, why not make it functional? So all the stuff I make is like dishwasher safe, microwave safe, right? So, but these are creative people. So he and I represent two halves of a whole that achieve a human design in ceramics or a cable modem, right? Where he tells me, I give him these buttons. I'm like, here's 5 different buttons. Tell me which one's too hard and which one's too easy. It's like, nope, that one's too hard, that one's too easy. And he feels them all. And he has a feel for it.
Yeah.
But that's an artistic call.
Yeah.
Right, here, I got to plug 6 cables in the back of this. Plug those 6 cables in. He's like, Matt, this sucks. Or, wow, this is brilliant. We should have done this a long time ago.
Yeah.
So those are the only 2 responses I need. It's a digital response.
Wow.
This sucks or it's awesome.
Yeah.
And if he doesn't say it's awesome, then it sucks. And I go back to the drawing board.
Yeah.
And I listen to what he told me was wrong. And I fix that. Or I go, God, it's going to cost me this to do that. Set-top box. He wanted a dome on this top of this big, just a set-top box. And I was like, why has this got to be domed? He's like, because it'll look sucked in if it's flat. But the difference in the tooling was $50,000 in tooling versus $250,000 in tooling. So I went to the project leader and I'm like, what do you want to pay for? $250,000 tool or $50,000 tool? He's like, we're buying the $50,000 tool. I'm like, okay. I got him the first units and he's like, you made the tops of these flat. And I'm like, I know you'd notice, but the project leader said, screw you. You ain't buying your tool. But plus we had to put other things on top of it. So it kind of needed to be flat. So that's a discussion we have. He's like, yeah, but you could have put feet on there. I'm like, those feet would be custom to whatever you put on top of it. Now they can just put the remote on top of there. It doesn't slide off. Or when the TV is rattling because the speaker volume's up and you leave your remote on there, it's going to rattle right off. That's not a great experience. So we're still talking about this human experience the whole time. And that's what our focus is. There was nothing in there about equations.
No.
No math
and
involved.
thank God.
Yeah, but that's the principles. We learned all that from play.
No, No, I really like I really liked your approach to this because it's almost like what the author I think was going for, but on steroids, but like in the best way.
Thank you.
Or maybe just advanced by a few decades.
But I'm a design guy. He's an analysis guy. So for him, the beauty is finding the failure because that's when he wins. For me, it's satisfying the needs of the human. That's when I win. I don't care when it fails. I want you to pick it up and be able to instantly use it, and it's reliable. His idea of reliable is decades. My idea of reliable for consumer electronics is months or years. Depends. So it's a different time scale. So that sets the paradigm about everything we do. I would have a different paradigm if I worked in the defense industry. for example.
Well, oh yeah, absolutely. I feel like that's like a totally separate. They're like in their own little cubby, and we're just gonna let them live their dream.
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. Let's go ahead and come back. Because I want to know if anybody feels really strongly that you should have to learn how to do something the old-fashioned way. I know my degree's in cell biology, and in our biochem lab we had to learn how to do PCRs the old-fashioned way, and it was a mandate. Everybody had to come in, and you had the bucket of ice, and you had hot water. You had to keep putting in the microwave, and you just had to keep holding your little tube. Okay, ice. Okay, 30 seconds. Okay, now back to the hot water. Okay, going to stand here for a minute and a half.
It's all the
Okay, we're going to go back here
all
for
the
30
emotional
seconds.
validation of missing a titration. Yeah. Oh, I ran by. I guess we start all over again. We wash everything.
The word titration just made me want to throw up.
I guess it's time to start the dishes.
But does anybody really feel strongly that you should, especially, obviously we're talking about engineers, but does anybody feel strongly that you should have to learn how to do something the old-fashioned way? If you're going to learn how to do it the old-fashioned way. You should be able to do it without a computer. Because the author, and I think some old school engineers, feel that way. And the author spent chapters making the case for why they think it was using computers as lazy engineering. That was where I was like, I need to talk about this. Because I don't know if I think it's lazy. Unless you think it's not. You don't, no. Raise of hands if you think you should learn how to do something if you, specifically for engineers, you think engineers should have to learn. Okay.
Castigliano's theorem.
Now keep your hand up if you agree with having to learn how to do something the old-fashioned way about everything, or do you think it's specific to engineering because of the type of work it is? You think it's because it's like so important? Oh, now that's a good point. Sometimes the new methods fail. The computer can fail, and if you don't know how to do it the old-fashioned way, you might not catch the mistake. The author talks about that.
Computers don't do assumptions, right?
No.
You give a computer assumptions. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, Rufus. Now, interesting. Okay. Okay, so if you're trying to come up, I like that. Abstract a new thing, you really should probably learn how to do it the old-fashioned way so you have a good foundation and a good fundamental. And you made the good point. You made the point, if you understand the concept and the foundation of it, maybe you don't have to learn how to do calculus with just a pencil. You can use a calculator, but if you at least understand the foundation of what you're doing and you understand the principles, that might be enough. So an it depends answer. We're hearing a lot of it depends. I thought this was going to be cut and dry. The author was like ready to go on like a book burning, but like a calculator burning. He was ready to just like Office Spaces, baseball bat to every computer and calculator known to mankind.
If only he had written this book 5 years later, he would have changed his entire tune.
You think?
Oh, I know.
Oh.
And I can tell you why. Oh. But I don't want to stifle anybody else's response.
No. Okay. Do you have thoughts on the... It depends. The concept.
Doomed to failure in the future because it's not solving the initial problem, which means you're not really improving.
Yeah, you can't improve on it if you don't understand it.
For example, if you make an aqueduct and you don't know that it's meant to take water from one place to another,
okay,
but not better for transferring water, and the water won't make it from one side to the other.
Yeah.
It looks better, or it's more functional, or it stays longer.
Yeah.
It's not actually sealed to contain water.
Yeah. If you don't understand the fundamental concept and you don't have that foundation, you can maybe improve it, but you're probably not going to actually functionally improve it. If you don't understand that, if you don't have that foundation and you don't have that baseline understanding. But if you want to build an aqueduct, in your example, maybe, again, you don't need to know how to do differential equations without any technological help. And you're open to using technology. You disagree with the author in this case.
Pretty strongly.
Yeah. So what do you, so this book's written 5 years later. Why do you think his opinion would change on this?
So
strong, by the way, very strong opinion if you didn't read the book.
So he missed technology that existed in 1990 that did not exist in 1985.
Okay.
So the computer revolution created a thing that we did not predict. As scientists and engineers, the whole purpose of a computer is that it's just the best abacus we've ever had, right? It's got more beads and sticks on it than any abacus ever. And it's an automated machine. And you can set up the beads as though gravity would pull them into the shape you want them to be with things called operational amplifiers that give you an output of the change. And that's how you actually get a calculator to calculate.
Yeah.
You just push electrons around. Well, it turns out if your beads are the size of electrons, you can fit a lot of them onto your abacus. And that's what's inside your phone. All those processors are abacuses full of little bead electrons being pushed out of their holes.
Okay.
Okay, so.
Okay, I'm with you.
All right, now, what he missed out was a thing called finite element analysis. And this is a thing a computer could do.
Okay. I strapped in. I was strapped in. I was locked in.
This is a finite element.
Okay, now we're back. We're back, folks.
It is a rectangle. That's a pretty easy finite element. I can give this very simple rules for bending because I know its thickness. So I can attribute a material property to this. And if I just change the material property, it'll change the bending.
Yeah.
So finite element analysis, if I model this as one bending beam, then I can just click a button and what does this look like in steel now? What does this look like in brass? What does this look like in plastic? What does this look like in bamboo?
Okay.
So then the thing I was showing you before about bending like this, it's going to bend a different amount if this is made of steel, won't it? It'll be much stiffer.
Yeah.
Maybe I don't need to turn it on its side, but I can get away with the plastic one, which might be cheaper, which is a different paradigm.
Okay.
We're not talking about those paradigms right now.
Yeah.
So
No, it's okay.
back to this finite element now. Imagine if the beam that I'm bending is your forearm. Does it look like this?
Yeah.
What kind of math would I do on a piece of paper to create a titanium replacement for your femur or your radius or your
Preferably
ulna?
none. Preferably
I'm guessing
none.
there ain't nothing that's going to be on a piece of paper. So I have to
Yeah.
3D model your actual bone.
Yeah.
So we use an instrument called a CT scan, and we're going to go CT scan your actual bone.
Yeah.
And then
model
we
it.
export that, and there are a series of, femoral components for your, if you're getting a replacement hip, you have an upper femoral component, you have an ischial component,
Yeah.
and they scan all of that, and we build a 3D computer model of your actual hip, so we can fix your actual hip, one in the universe that exists.
Yeah.
And we cannot do that without computers. Not only that,
Yeah.
but we would never have a solution for anything like that because we cannot make a substitution of bone for titanium without having something where I can click a button and change the properties of the geometry that I have available. So I have to have something that's stiffer and harder than actual bone, but not too much more because then the bone breaks.
Yeah.
Because it's the delicate thing. And he talks about that in his book. You just make the next weakest thing. So on the human body, this is one of those, that is a disposable bone, man. This is what,
Disposable.
it keeps you from breaking your neck. So you fall off a building, you break your clavicle. Why?
Yeah.
Because you did not break your spine or your neck. So
Yeah,
this is the failure point that is, evolved in your body. The universe evolved this for you. Otherwise, you just die.
Yeah.
So to keep that from happening, you have breaky bits here. And there's other areas of your body that are, this is why you have 10 fingers, so you can lose 8 of them.
Yeah.
I mean, that's an evolutionary thing. I didn't make the rules.
Oh, no. Yeah. That's fair. Same with the toes. You can lose. You
can
can lose a
lose most
good
of them.
chunk of them.
You can lose like 8 of them and still be good.
Yeah.
Yes,
Oh my
this
God.
is so when you think of this in this way, he did not have access to finite element analysis,
Yeah.
which is what built the bridges that are in Indianapolis now.
Yeah.
He could not fathom on a piece of paper any of the structures that we just built in the last year here. So had he written this book 5 years later,
Yeah.
he would have instantly reversed his case because we use these new, engineered concretes and engineered steels that are unlike anything that we could even have envisioned at his time. And I'm talking to you about technology that's evolved in my lifetime. So this is 30 years already antiquated knowledge. I can't even tell you what tomorrow will bring.
Yeah. Well, and I would love to know what his thoughts on like AI and engineering would be. I think the concept.
Yeah, we still haven't ever found a button that says design my part or solve my problem in any computer thing. So I think we're going to have engineers for a long time. Yeah. I think you're stuck with us. Sorry. We try to be bearable.
Yeah. Little job security is always good.
Job security is good. I'll solve your problems for lunch money. Yeah. It's a living.
Yeah. Do you think there's a role for AI in engineering? Is that something already happening? We've talked about a lot about AI in various books.
Yeah, I think it's different for different fields. So what I found so far, like just ChatGPT, the 4.0 version, the beta that was out, a friend of mine had access to. I thought it was fascinating. So I'm like, tell me about injection molding. And I tell you, it gave me the best concise paragraph about what injection molding of plastics is. And I can't think of a better way that could have been an effective, accessible communications tool for people to use. Yeah. So then I gave it a harder problem. Oh. Okay, how big of an injection mold do I need to have if I have this much pressure and I have a part that's this big with this much cross volume? And it's like, well, I'd need to know more information. I'm like, actually, you don't. If I gave that to a human, you'd be able to do this computation on the back of a napkin in 5 seconds and give me an answer. But ChatGPT can't think. All it can tell you is the most statistically next likely word that you want to hear. Yeah. So it's the worst boyfriend or girlfriend, honestly. So it kind of tells you. Yeah, it's a bad engineer and a really bad substitute for a human. But it's going to get better at predictive algorithms. And I think that stuff's great because predictive algorithms can do things like look for failure. And that's what predictive algorithms are all about. The next most likely point to fail is a different paradigm than the next most likely word you want to hear. Yeah. But it is the same code that lives behind it that looks for those sorts of things. So if you're clever about how you program it, you can do things like predict bridge failure. So the I-94 bridge collapse that happened in Minneapolis is like, the universities of 3 different states around were telling the government of Minnesota, this bridge is literally going to go any day now. And they did so for a decade. There were class action lawsuits. Oh, it was crazy. And they were just like, yeah, it's not a problem. And now 34 people are dead. Right? So maybe now it's a problem. And that's the problem with looking at this type of engineering or, how he had to deal with this. His nature and the reason he's an analysis guy and he sees these problems is because at the end is where you stack the bodies. For the stuff I do in design, people never use your thing. Yeah. So if your thing isn't used, guess what? You failed 100%.
Fair.
Yeah.
Before I could talk to you forever, but I want to go ahead and open this up to our group and give everyone an opportunity to ask our wonderful expert really anything.
Yeah,
I feel like I could talk to you about almost
questions about
anything.
the book too, so people want to be like, hey, tell me about this, or is there a new version of this, or whatever.
Yeah, there were a lot of examples that he gave in the book. There's probably modern ones, that we could pull from. So I'd love to open it up if anyone wants to ask about the book. Or about engineering.
Sure.
If anyone wants to be an engineer after reading this. Tell you what, I don't want to design a bridge. Sorry. Tell my bridge designers. Yeah. Yeah, interesting. So the question was asking about how much. Well,
go ahead.
Yeah, how much of the user design is on your side versus maybe after the fact,
right?
When it's too late.
So it's a great question. So I am not divorced from the sort of human experience. Part of that I can gain from direct observation. So part of it's on me to learn what I need to learn about a user using the product. So at the very front end, I have, in my particular field and the companies I work in, I invite myself to the things where they're using our current product or a previous product, a competitor's product, that kind of thing. And we're like watching through one-way glass, because this is really telling me how the thing is actually being used, not the way I envisioned its use, right?
Yeah.
So that's the first part, is to sort of learn what bad looks like. So that's this looking for failure in design,
Yeah.
right? So what is a thing a person frustrated by, right? Necessity is not the mother of invention, it's dissatisfaction. So when I find somebody dissatisfied by a
True.
thing, that's how I know that that's a thing that needs to be fixed.
Yeah.
So that's on the front end. And then later, after I've worked on development, I've got a product, we will generally make variants and we present them to a group of people called industrial designers. And those are artists. And those artists are like, wow, this feels great, or wow, this feels like crap, or I don't like the smell, or this is cold, or right. And they'll give us all sorts of like normal human feedback that I don't think of, because I'm like, bro, does it work? You know, that's my bar, is does it work? And they're like, yes, but it can also not suck. And I'm like, cool, what does not suck mean? Can you put a force on that? Is there a specification for it not suck? So first advice I got from an industrial designer was, you know, when I asked him, why does it have to be shaped like this? And he goes, well, if you're going to take the time to make something, why not make it beautiful? And that's really speaking to the humanity that, you know, it's like, whoa, this is actually what we're trying to do here. We are connecting to humans. I'm glad I got to encounter this individual very early in my career to snap that into a sharp focus. Then the last portion of it is user groups. So then the stuff I get to participate in is average users who are sometimes, in the case of consumer electronics, they'll have people who are the head buyer of Walmart or Best Buy, or, you know, one of these, whoever's buying this thing, and they'll come in and fiddle around with it. Or it'll be at a consumer electronics show, we'll have one tucked away somewhere, and they'll go and they'll play with it, and like, oh, I love this, or oh, I hate this, or I can sell 1 million of these, or I can't sell these at all, right? And we get that kind of feedback. That's that sort of thing. In the medical industry, we do a separate thing that's actual user studies, which are part of the clinical studies, to make sure that a human can use this. Yeah, so we give it to actual people who would actually use this product, and they use it in parallel with their current product. And that's, you know, if they need to test I'm using a new insulin pump or whatever, they're, you know, testing this product, but it's in parallel with another thing. So they have a backup safety, and they give their feedback, and we collect that. If enough people like it, we report that to the FDA and say, hey, 800 people around the world in 7 different cities said this does not suck. Is that okay for us to try out on a market? They're like, yeah, you're going to do a limited release for 6 months, and then we'll get some more feedback. And then if your return rate is above X, you need to go back to the drawing board and start again. You know, so that's different for each of these industries. Finally, there is a whole separate thing that we aren't really talking about, which is the measure of goodness in form of returns, injury, or, you know, in worst cases, death. And, you know, what does a failure look like? And, you know, you have anything from people who have uncontrollable braking in a car to, you know, hey, we overloaded this train with, you know, 300 cars instead of 100, and they took this corner and it's 50 miles an hour instead of 45, and we tip over a whole train into a city in the middle of Ohio. You know, so there's things that happen that are like that are outside the boundary of what we were told. So that disparity still gets accumulated as part of this human experience. And it just really depends whether you're on the analysis side like the author is, or on the genesis side like I am, as to which one hits you in the face first. And the biggest measure I have is if nobody uses my thing, then I know I've failed. So I get to fail very fast in my industry. Did I answer your question? All right, good.
Yeah. Ooh.
So
are
that's
bridges the most common to fail?
So what's the most common to fail is what's in the human eye, right? So he talks about a flight. in his book as well, right?
Yeah.
So that's a mechanical engineering failure right there as an airplane went down. That's on the MEs and the aeronautical engineers. We failed on that one. But why did we fail?
Yeah.
And we failed because of something simple, which was a material science problem, right? So what was the real failure point? So when we look at these things from his point of view, where he's like, oh, I've got, bridge failure and stuff like that. His point in the book is that if you build a thing, it will eventually fail.
Yeah.
I just happen to work on products whose life is kind of known by the user, but what's the life expectancy of a bridge? Infinity? Like there's still aqueducts in all of Europe, in every European country that were laid there a couple thousand years ago.
That's true.
Is that how long a thing needs to last? So how long should a thing last? And man, that is a fascinating cultural question, because some cultures will throw people at the problem to build a pyramid or a wall. And other cultures will be like, no, we can't lose a single life on the thing that we work. And this is how we operate. So yeah, it's we try to build things forever to be perfectly durable, but the joke about the design engineers is I'm done with this when you pry it from my cold dead fingers, right? So there has to be a product launch, or we don't have a product. And if we don't sell a product, we don't get money. And if we don't get money, we don't pay you to copy off your paper. So I have to give them a thing periodically. So there's always this, what is the optimization point for what's acceptable, and trying to accept what degree of failure, like in the case of, he talks about the bridge collapse in the airport there in 1979. And that's nobody expected it to do this, but oh, by the way, they built it wrong. It's not even to the specification. So when you go through and you read the Wikipedia, it was new to him in 1985 because it just happened in 82 or whatever. And they were still doing the whole, investigation was ongoing, but we can tell they built it wrong. The people who assembled it wrong, and the designers, by the way, designed it wrong too. So it was wrong twice. And somehow it got through a board of people. That's kind of like when you watch a movie and you're like, this got through an entire production crew. There were 7 executive producers on the front of this film, and I just sat and lost 90 minutes of my life that I'm never getting back from this film, right? So it's that kind of experience, right? So except in the worst case, it's human life.
Yeah. Don't talk about Cocaine Bear like that. Sorry. Yeah, Rufus.
Yes. Oh, yeah.
Planned obsolescence.
Yeah. Yeah. That's right.
Yeah.
So they get away with it with bridges. I see what you're getting at. They kind of get away with it because they're like, oh, well, we couldn't have predicted this, or we didn't predict this load. Well, at a certain point, we didn't predict that people were going to fly 2 whole-ass airplanes into the side of the World Trade Center either. Is that a load that we should have predicted, right? So predictiveness in engineering is and they're like, oh, this will withstand a plane hitting this building. They actually said that when they built the World Trade Center. But the largest plane was 1/4 of the size of the planes that slammed into those buildings. So when they made the statement, there was no such animal. There wasn't Cocaine Bear. And then Cocaine Bear showed up twice in the same morning and took out 2 buildings, right? So that's what happened. So we didn't predict that.
Yeah.
So how good does the prediction need to be? So back to your question then, Rufus, when it talks about failure, it's going to be determined by this acceptability limit. So the worst case that we've heard about in the world of planned obsolescence was an actual consortium of Osram, Sylvania, and these other light bulb companies going, hey, look, we could make light bulbs that last forever, but then we don't sell light bulbs and we all go poor. So why don't we just make our light bulbs kind of suck? And so they set a suck limit. They didn't call it that. They called it some other limit.
I know. I think that's the official
But one
term.
of the companies just didn't comply. And all the other companies were testing every company to make sure they were complying, to make sure their light bulbs burned out enough. And they're like, your light bulbs last twice as long. And I'm like, yeah, we're advertising for them. We're selling twice as many light bulbs as you. And they're like, yeah, but that's not what we agreed to. And they're like, suck it. Right? We already got their money. We're already rich because of this. So they tried planned obsolescence and it doesn't work. Now, what you do is you plan failure. So planning on a boat, you have a clevis pin, a type of pin that goes in there, cotter pin, that is a shear pin that holds the propeller on. So if the propeller turning at 3,000 RPM hits a log and bites into the log and instantly stops, you don't explode the engine. Instead, you shear off this pin and the propeller falls off. So now you got to go buy a propeller and a pin instead of buying an engine.
An engine, yeah.
So that is the planned failure point.
Yeah.
If you look at your car, your planned failure points are your tires, your brakes, your windshield, your front and rear bumpers, your side doors. All of that is intended to fail. And there is stuff where we measure the failure ability of these things with an entire organization that we invented in the 50s called the National Highway Transport Safety Authority. And those people tell you if a car is good enough. They give rollover ratings, side impact ratings, and now there's offset front collisions at 50 miles. Oh, wow. It's crazy, and I love seeing this stuff because engineers love breaking things. The one that I wanted to mention that I didn't get to before about a specific failure mode, and this is how we look at the failure as a tangent to this. Boeing, when they were testing the 777 Dreamliner, lost 4 years in production because they snapped a wing. And one of the things that they snapped was they're trying to bend this wing. Part of the test is you take the plane, you fix the plane, you grab the wing, and you just fold the wing up until it breaks. And there's a point where it's got to break. And you could watch the two observation booths filled with engineers. And one group was cheering when it broke, and the other group was literally throwing their clipboards up against the wall and storming out. Because one group was only responsible for the distance that it flexed, but the other group was responsible for the failure point of where it failed. So they were trying to push the failure to a different location. So one group succeeded at the same time that the other group failed. And then the most human part of this is they do another thing where they open the doors and they put regular people on there who are just people off the streets on this plane that's on the ground or whatever. And they tell you, we're going to have you climb up in this plane. You're going to sit down in a seat like you're on the plane. We're going to have the doors already open. We're going to have the chutes, the exit chutes deployed. And we want you to just get it. When we ring the bell, you're going to stand up and orderly get off to the nearest exit and jump off into the in the chute. And they all, signed waivers and all that and got paid $50 or whatever. And I love watching this one too, because a very similar reaction. They get everybody off the plane and they do it, and they have like 2.5 minutes or something to get everybody off the plane. So they get off in like under 2 minutes. So there's a whole group of people who are cheering, and then other group are just throwing their clipboards against the wall. And the reason they're angry is because one woman got to the edge and she balked. She got to the edge and didn't step off. She knew what she had to do. She was fully instructed, but she couldn't mentally compel herself to take that leap. And she had to be convinced by somebody else eventually that it was going to be okay. And then she went. In an emergency situation, that's a failure. They failed that test. And it cost them years of development to make the slides wider, more inviting, a lower angle, so a longer slide. And it had to have room to fit that under the plane and carry the extra 1,000 pounds of bulk for these longer slides times 6 slides just to make this happen because one woman hesitated on the edge.
Oh my God.
That's sometimes how critical the test has to be. So determining what failure looks like is a very squishy thing. And knowing what good looks like lets us know what failure looks like. So we must determine what good and acceptable are before we know what bad is.
That brings up something really interesting where you're testing with a group of random people. But then you think about, what if she hadn't been selected?
That's a good point. You're testing, you're just testing random, but you don't know if your sample size or the people you grabbed are a good representation of the people you're trying to serve or the community,
With some of the standards that then determine our failure points or the perspective of what failure is.
So part of that, for this particular case, this industry has a government regulation to it. So it's the regulatory body. So each regulatory body has given its weight to the government. So the FDA's one of its function is to sue big, slow-moving companies that have lots of money to make it look profitable for them screwing somebody to the wall. But by the same token, it also makes all the little guys not get into the game because if they get screwed to the wall, their whole business goes under. Whereas these big companies don't have to worry about it. They're like, oh yeah, we know how to do product development. We know how to deal with the FDA. So the business of doing business becomes part of engineering, and that becomes part of the problem-solving equation. It's what I can demonstrate. I don't do tests that I can't have an output that doesn't look like an obvious win or loss to a human completely unskilled in engineering. Part of my test design is the test designs that I do for people like me who see them, and then the people like me who do not see them, or the people who see them who don't have my background.
Yeah. And you know, one of my questions was going to be, what is the role of like the layperson in engineering? Like, what is the role of the person using the bridge and ensuring that the bridge
have opinions?
Have opinions. And that takes me back to my initial point, which was to make sure you vote and make sure you get out, because if those regulatory agencies are really important, right? And your Congress people, your senators, even your state representatives are so important in setting those standards and making sure that those agencies are funded, and that the people who are on those boards and who are involved in that are properly credentialed, and that they're vetted, and that, you know, they have the best interests of the public. You have actually a really strong and really important voice in all of engineering, and in particular for the subject of this book, structural engineering. And that's making sure you're participating civically, and making sure the people around you participate civically. So again, the election has already started. It does not start next week. It ends next week. Make sure you get out and vote. That is my final hoorah to everybody. But so with that, I think we're going to go ahead and wrap it up. If you are available to stay for a few minutes, if people want to come, people come up and chat. Otherwise, thank you guys so much. I want to get this right. Next month, our book is The Devil's Element, Phosphorus in a World Out of Balance. I have a lot of experience with phosphorus. I grew up next to phosphorus mines. Because Florida. So I'm really excited to talk about phosphorus and all the radiation I probably drank in the Florida aquifer as a child.
You'll be fine.
I'm fine. No, the Florida public education system did much worse for me than phosphorus ever could. The failure point, in the state of Florida is
I ain't dead yet.
Obvious. So with that, thank you so much, and I look forward to seeing you guys in November. And toodaloo, see you next time. Woo! Thank you so much for coming and talking engineering.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
And not bridges. Yeah. And blowing my mind. This is why I am 10%. This is why I'm 10% afraid of engineers, because you always say something that scares me and like blows my mind. And but it happens